Hello and welcome back to the mighty Alien on TV. Today we are back in War Thunder, and today's a bit more of a tutorial type video for presumably some of the newer players to War Thunder and War Thunder Ground Forces. Today we'll be talking about the tank ammunition types, which can be pretty confusing because there are tons of them and the difference isn't very clear as shown by War Thunder. It is still in beta, so we can't really blame them yet, but we hope they'll put in a new tutorial for this sort of thing later on for newer players, as it's quite confusing and I only really know because I'm a bit of a tank nerd, to be honest. So if we have a look, if you're pretty new to War Thunder, this is probably one of the first tanks you would have unlocked. T-50, pretty standard Russian, very fast, quite good gun as well. If we have a look at the modifications, at the ammunition, see the standard ammunition here, it says APHEBC, which sounds like a lot of gobbledygook, and it says what it stands for: armor piercing, high explosive with ballistic cap shell. What this really means is that it's a shell that is fired out of the gun, and when it hits an enemy, it will, if it penetrates, it will then have a fuse, and it says the fuse delay is 0.9 meters, and that means that after 0.9 meters, after the initial penetration, the explosive charge inside of the shell will explode, fragmenting the shell everywhere, ultimately doing a lot of damage to the crew, which of course is very effective. And the ballistic cap on the armor piercing high explosive would do all that anyway, but the ballistic cap is the is just basically the tip to make it more aerodynamic, better with ballistics. So that increases the muzzle velocity and whatnot. So that's a good all-round round for any tank, really. It's good at it's good penetration, it has good crew damage and module damage. It's generally what tanks would be firing already. Average sort of penetration compared to the later shells you can get. With the T-50, the first different type of shell you can unlock is the very long name, BR243SP. No idea what that means, but it calls itself AP, which stands for Armor Piercing Shell. This is basically the APHEBC without the HEBC. This is that the AP is just the shell. As soon as it hits, the only damage it's going to do is the shell hitting stuff. So there's no explosive charge. As soon as it goes in, it'll only destroy what it actually hits. There's no explosion, there's no fragmentation or anything like that. And moving on, APCR works in exactly the same way, just better penetration. APCR, armor piercing composite rigid, which has a very rigid center to the shell, and looks like a dart almost, giving it quite good aerodynamics. So we hear muzzle velocity at 985 meters per second. See, it's much better than the AP, which is 757, and the APHEBC is only 760. So overall, this shoots a lot faster in terms of muzzle velocity, and has a much higher penetration. You see, at 10 meters, 108 millimeters of penetration, compared to the normal rounds, which is 53. But beware at range. So if we have a look at this statistic, 1,000 meters is 35 millimeters of penetration there. 1,000 is 30, so it's less even at 1,000. So you've just got to be careful at this. At range, APCR is not as good as normal, either APHEBC or heat, as we'll look onto later. The T-50 doesn't actually have this, the ammo heat, high explosive anti-tank, so we'll go have a look at a tank that does. So if I go to my German lineup, the Stug 3A is one of the first assault guns you're probably going to get. If we have a look at the modifications, look at the ammo type. So it's got APC-BC, which is armor piercing composite ballistic cap shell. Works basically the same way as APHEBC, so we won't go over that. But then the other ammo you can unlock is heat, high explosive anti-tank. Now on this tank, you see the standard APCBC has 45mm of penetration at 10 meters range, which isn't very good, to be honest, but at tier 1 it's all you really need. But we go to heat, and it's 80mm at 10 meter range, and 100 meter, and 500 meter and all the ranges after that, it maintains its penetration value at any range. It doesn't matter how far your enemy is from you. If you hit them, it will have the same penetration value, whatever range, which is very useful for long range shooting. But beware that when this hits, I don't think it does as much damage as a AP HEBC or an APCBC. So bear that in mind, as soon as it hits, it won't do as much crew or module damage as the explosive charge. Going into specifics, heat has actually got a copper tip, which on impact, explosives are set off in the shell, which then melts the copper, which gets shoved through the armour, I believe, and then basically just goes into the tank and just really, really messes stuff up in there. In real life, this stuff is horrible. It really is. And, well, it's effective, but absolutely horrible in what it does to the crew. Imagine molten copper flying around inside the tank. So, that's heat. And also, on the Sturmgeschütz 3 als A, you have second heat, which is just more penetration, 100mm instead of 80mm. Works the same way, though. Now, the other ammo type we haven't covered is high explosive. High explosive is a type of shell that you would only really use on tanks with guns meant to fire high explosive. For example, when I say that, it might be pretty weird to understand, but the way I say that, I mean tanks such as the M4A3 Sherman 105mm gun. This was meant to fire high explosive rounds. If we have a look at the modifications here, the initial shell is high explosive. It doesn't matter that it's got only 28mm of penetration at every range. That's not going to penetrate anything. It's the explosive charge inside, which as soon as it hits because obviously when it explodes, the explosion will just spread across the area of the tank that you're shooting at. If it can somehow find a weak point in that area you shot at, it's going to again force its way into the tank, and it's high explosive, fiery death. And that really, really does do a lot of damage. And then also, of course, you've got the heat for the 105 HVSS. Another tank, as an example, is one you'd get a lot later on with the Russians, is the KV-2. If we have a look here, the KV-2 is the monstrous with the is the absolute monster with the 152mm gun. It was actually made to fire anti-concrete shells, which have crazy penetration, 150mm at 10 meters range of penetration. These were meant, and it's got explosive charge inside the shell as well, so it's very effective against just about anything. These shells were meant to take out heavily fortified structures such as concrete bunkers and pillboxes. So yeah, imagine firing that at a tank and it will do a lot of damage. But a lot of people prefer to fire high explosive because it's just so effective. Not only has it actually got quite good penetration, that can penetrate anything from a medium tank to, well, it can penetrate Panzer IVs, Panzer IVGs, Panzer IV F2s, any of those. It'll probably be able to penetrate that if you choose your shot carefully. And it's a massive 40kg high explosive shell. That is going to mess you up. If that hits, you're just going to turn into a fiery death ball. You would not want to be on the receiving end of one of those. So, another thing about heat, high explosive anti-tank, if we go back to our Sturmgeschütz 3 aufs A, if we see heat, it says fuse sensitivity 0.1mm. That means that the explosive charge inside the shell will be set off after 0.1mm. That's how sensitive the charge is. Which means that if you're shooting at either spaced armour, tracks, or any other type of armour that isn't immediately onto a tank, it's pretty hard to describe. But if I find, is it on Panzer II? Let's have a look here. Yes, here. So as you can see, the Panzer II Alf C has extra tracks and an extra wheel on the front. If a heat shell were to hit this, it wouldn't do any damage to the inside of the tank, because as a shell comes in, it will hit that, and the explosive charge will set off, and it most likely wouldn't be able to get through that, or it will get through that and then just bounce off the inner one because it effectively works with spaced armor. A normal AP, APCR, or an APCBC shell will probably be able to get through that, but heat will not work against these tracks, or the side tracks, or any of the suspension, or the wheels at all, because the charge would ignite before it can actually get into the tank. The same with if you've got a gun mantlet with armor still behind it, it wouldn't be able to get through. It will stop at the spaced armor part. So bear that in mind when pick your shots carefully when firing heat. As if you hit any sort of spaced armor at all, or any tracks or whatever, then it will not get through to the center of the tank. Just bear that in mind when you're firing high explosive anti-tank. Now, different shells are good against different type of armor. For example, heavy tanks, obviously very thick armor. You wouldn't want to be firing high explosive from a low velocity for like a small caliber gun. For example, if you're in a Panzer IV F2, you wouldn't want to be firing HE at this when you have AP HEBC rounds to be able to fire at this and penetrate here, all around the turret. So you just got to pick your ammo types carefully and make sure you switch them when you need to. For example, if you have the back of this, you could fire. I wouldn't say you could fire HE at that, but I would stick. I mean, AP HEBC is probably the best ammo all round. It's got an explosive charge, got good penetration. But if you're struggling to penetrate your target, then switch to APCR if it's available to you, because you want to do some damage to it rather than none. But say you got the arse of a Panzer IV, you could just fire HE right into its arse, blow up the engine, and blow up the fuel tanks, maybe hit the ammo if you're lucky. You'll be able to get through that if it's thin enough and if your HE rounds have enough penetration. You just got to pick your ammo types carefully and know when to use them. You'll gradually learn how to use them the more you play, and as long as you make yourself conscious to your different ammo types you load, then you'll be fine in the game of War Thunder Ground Forces. Thanks for watching, guys. If you want to see more War Thunder videos like this one, then subscribe to our channel, The Mighty Sam 101 TV. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up, and I will see you guys next time.